going on, everybody? Welcome to the Vikings Now by Chat Sports. My name is Patrick Siepman, and coming up on today's show, we got some big-time injury news around these three players. Jordan Addison, we got an update on when he is possibly looking to return after he was carted off in joint practice versus the Cleveland Browns. TJ Hockenson, could he be returning Week 7? We'll share with you guys the latest info on him. And then we do have some concerning injury news around Robert Tonyan, which I'll share with you guys here in a sec. But then also later on today's show, Brian Flores finally responded to Tua after he called him a terrible person the other day. And I thought Flores handled it perfectly. You know, it kind of seemed he was at peace at the situation. So we'll share with you guys what Flores had to say on the second half of today's show. So make sure you guys do stay tuned for that. But hey, we're also closing in on 28,000 subscribers here on the channel. We just need 209 more of you guys to hit that sub button. I want to hit 28K for Adrian Peterson, my favorite Vikings player of all time. I put the goal as to hit 28K here on the channel before Week 1 against the New York Giants, and you guys are absolutely killing it. So if you guys haven't already, hit that sub button and lock us in. Well, let's get you guys an update around Jordan Addison here. So this was coming in from Darren Wolfson. He said he is anticipating he will be back midweek leading into the Giants game, but does not know if the ankle will be 100%. And with high ankle injuries, I'm assuming the Vikings will, proceed very cautiously about bringing back Jordan Addison because of the fact that you have other guys in this wide receiver room who have stepped up. And I think the Vikings are in a situation where you can not necessarily put Jordan Addison on ice, but tell him you are not seeing the field until you are absolutely 110% healthy. I would not risk rolling Addison out there, especially for Week 1 against the Giants, considering the Vikings the weeks after that have like the Niners, the Texans, the Lions, Packers, Jets. Like, you got some really good football teams where I would prefer Addison to be 100% against those guys rather than, forcing the issue and playing against the Giants and potentially, hindering himself, for the rest of the season. But it kind of gets me to this point. The Vikings can manage Jordan Addison missing time. Now, if you would have asked me before the season or before a couple weeks ago, like, let's just say Addison, following the DUI, what if he gets suspended the whole year? How do you feel about this wide receiver room? I would have told you I'm very, very concerned because heading into training camp, heading into the preseason, you necessarily just had Justin Jefferson and a bunch of nobodies besides Jordan Addison. But we saw two players really step up and play their best football of their career the past 2 weeks, and the first guy being Tristan Jackson. Massive shout out to him. Really balled out in J.J. McCarthy's debut against the Raiders as he connected with them for 4 receptions, 100 yards in that game, and also had a touchdown. But specifically this past week against the Cleveland Browns, still had 4 receptions, 39 yards, another touchdown. And we see that big playability with Tristan Jackson. I mean, 19.9 yards per catch in 2 preseason games is fantastic. And he also had that jet sweep, which I loved. We saw that burner. We saw that extra juice that he can head to. And, honestly, originally when I was thinking about Tristan Jackson, what type of receiver he is, he was always a good route runner, but I always felt like he lacked that top-end athletic ability. But now this preseason, I don't know if he was putting in just extra work this past offseason and he increased his speed, but he looked fast, he looked athletic, and he looked like one of the more athletic players out there on the football field. But speaking about speed, how about Speedy Naylor, man? Jalen Naylor has been awesome. Only had 4 receptions on very limited reps, but you see the big playability, him eclipsing 94 yards and having 23.5 yards per catch. And I thought the coolest part about Naylor, Jefferson was doing an interview this past week after practice, and they asked him, they were like, hey, Jefferson, name some of the young receivers across the NFL or potentially on your roster that you think are going to take that next step. He mentioned Tank Dell. He mentioned Malik Neighbors. And then he goes, keep your eyes out on this guy, Speedy. And then the person giving the interview said, can we have his government name, not just Speedy? And he obviously said, no, his name is Jalen Naylor. Keep your eyes out on him. He will be turning heads. And he actually said he's going to be a big part of this offense this upcoming season. So even if Addison were to have to miss time, I am more than comfortable with having Jalen Naylor, Tristan Jackson slot into that wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 spot. And I'll tell you what, I feel a lot more comfortable about that group than I did a couple of weeks ago. But what about TJ Hockenson? When is he going to return after this scumbag Kirby Joseph took out his knee in one of the final games of the regular season? last year. Also, funny enough about Kirby Joseph, he had the same move in this play right here against Tyler Higbee in the divisional round. He ended up tearing his ACL as well. My least favorite player in the National Football League is number 31 on the Detroit Lions. But Darren Wolfson had an update around TJ Hockenson saying, watching Hockenson off to the side on Monday looked a little hesitant at times, a little bit more than a week or two ago. I think the bottom line on Hockenson after the bye, does that mean like late October, early November? But it's still going to be a bit on TJ Hockenson. Now, I'm hoping for a week 7 return as he is on PUP list, so he will be on that until at least week 6. But, if they could somehow have, Hockenson out there for week 7, I mean, that would be awesome for the Vikings. I thought originally it was going to be more weeks 12, week 13, around Thanksgiving time. But if he could somehow be ready to go week 7, it could be huge, specifically for Sam Darnold. I think when you have a sporadic quarterback, which Sam Darnold is, you need that safety blanket, because if he's making his reads, it's most likely going to be number 18, Justin Jefferson, first read, and then it's probably a quick off to, Jalen Naylor, and then you have that safety blanket in TJ Hockenson where he can take a 3-yard flat or a 2-yard curl, whatever it is. He can turn that into, let's just say, 6-7 yards just because of how elite he is. So having TJ Hockenson back would be awesome, but, it would be specifically awesome for Sam Darnold just to have that. But we also got an injury update around another tight end, and this was incredibly concerning. This was coming in from Judd Zolgad, works for Score North, very tapped-in Vikings beat reporter. But he said Tonyan got a good chance here. But this, to me, signifies that his body might just be done. It's a phenomenally tough sport. He's a big guy. He's obviously taking a pounding. I wonder if this is the end of the road here. I don't see a path here. I'll tell you what, when I read this quote from Judd, I was, one, incredibly concerned, but also, two, to me, this was new information. I don't know if I've just been closed off on the Robert Tonyan injury news over the last couple of weeks, but I thought he was having a great training camp and great OTA period. We heard Alec Lewis rave about him about him and his performance during OTAs. We saw J.J. McCarthy connect with him on a couple of deep balls over the middle of the field during training camp, and he actually had a good preseason run. And now with him potentially having to retire before the season started, I mean, that's just concern to me, and it's also, new information. Again, maybe I've just been closed off to the Robert Tonyan news, but that was just, news to me. But, hey, if you guys want the Vikes to be healthy this season, I know I ask you guys to do a lot here on the channel. Subscribe, comment, like the video. But if you want the Vikes to be healthy, I am a superstitious guy. Just please hit that thumbs up icon. Don't jinx us like today's video, as funny enough, I asked you guys to do this on a video that I put out 3 hours before J.J. McCarthy. The news broke that he tore his meniscus. So don't want to blame you guys too much for that. But hey, don't jinx it. Like this freaking video so we don't have to deal with that injury news during the season. But coming up next year on the program, we're going to be talking about what Brian Flores had to say into response of what Tua said about him on a podcast. We'll share you guys those quotes here in a second. But first off, I want to give a massive shout out to today's presenting sponsor, and that is PrizePicks. And if you guys download the PrizePicks app and use promo code CLNS, we'll match your first deposit up to $100, as PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. And I already have a lineup for week 1 of the football season. I'm taking the more on Caleb Williams passing yards at 236.5, and then the more on Justin Jefferson receiving yards at 89.5, and then DJ Moore also taking us more on his receiving yards at 63.5. But download the PrizePicks app today and use promo code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code CLNS on PrizePicks for a deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, run your game. All right, let's talk about the drama around the Minnesota Vikings. Brian Flores, he had his press conference yesterday, and you knew the first question he was going to be asked was about what Tua said about him. This is what Flo had to say. He said, "I'm genuinely happy for the success that Tua has had, and I really wish him nothing but the best. Player relationships are very important to me. Look, I'm human. That hit me in a way that I wouldn't say was positive. I've got to use that and say, how can I grow from that? How can I be better? I'm always going to correct mistakes. I'm always going to have a high standard. Reflecting on the relationship, there's things that I could do better, and I've grown in that. And just listening to Flores talk about this Tua situation, he really seemed unbothered. Like, obviously, he was, concerned about, or not concerned. Obviously, he was going to get asked about what Tua said about him, as Tua called him a terrible person. I'm sure Flores was just sitting at home with his family, and he saw that kind of notification pop up on his phone as it went semi-viral everywhere about what Tua had to say about him. But he seemed unbothered. He didn't really seem worried about it. And the one thing that I loved during this press conference was actually Josh Metellus and Harrison Phillips, while he was giving this presser, they came behind him and they both kind of flexed their arms like this and kind of looked like Flores' bodyguards, showing support for the defensive coordinator, which I think is awesome. Kevin O'Connell was also asked about it. He said, here in this Vikings organization, Flores is loved. And I will make this note, if you want to spin zone this in a positive way for the Minnesota Vikings, maybe Tua's comments could keep Brian Flores as the defensive coordinator here for a couple of years. Like, I think if the Vikings defense has a top 10 year, like I am expecting they will, I'm assuming Flores will get some interviews, but let's just say that these owners are looking at the comments Tua just made and saying to themselves, do we really want to bring in that noise and bring in that guy into our organization? Maybe it keeps him in Minnesota for a little while longer. But my final thoughts on this, and then we're done talking about the Tua situation here on the channel. I don't think this was a big deal. I honestly don't really have a problem with what Tua said. That's just his opinion, and I'm cool with that. I just thought it was weird and unnecessary out of Tua. Like, I thought he could have just handled it as, hey, you know what? Me and Brian Flores, we didn't really have a good relationship, but I love my man Mike McDaniel, and turn it into more of a positive story around how McDaniel's has upped his game instead of just bashing Brian Flores and just turning it into, calling him a terrible person. Like, those are fighting words from Tua. So, final thoughts there, not a big deal. It's just kind of weird and, unnecessary out of the Dolphins quarterback. But let's show Brian Flores some love here, as he's clearly loved in the organization here in Minnesota. So give me a skull flow down below in the comments section. Show him our support here on Vikings Now. Now, if you guys do want to give me a follow on Twitter, that's a handle right there, at Pat Sieps. If you guys do so, I'll give you guys a follow right back. But thank you guys so much for the support on the show as of late. See you guys next time. Skol Vikes.